Right now, drones have struck Putin. It's an apocalypse in Moscow. A swarm of iron birds broke through Russian air defenses. This video is blowing up the internet. The Kremlin is on the verge of collapse. The Ukrainian armed forces are in action. A new strike on the dam in Belgorod. The Kremlin is in panic. Russian positions are simply being washed away. Ukrainian defenders are liberating more and more territory, but Putin wants more blood. Plans for conquest. The Kremlin is preparing to attack 4 new regions. And a shock from the USA. The American leader is once again ready to intervene. Urgent! A coup in the Kremlin. The FSB is searching for enemies. Purges are already in full swing. The bunker dweller is losing control. The country is hanging by a thread from chaos. Extreme shock. The Kremlin is brandishing the petrol, a nuclear catastrophe in Russia. Putin is trying to intimidate the world after the sanctions, but the effectiveness of the Wunderwaffe is in question. In fact, information about this weapon has been revealed. A terrible failure. Shock. Russian prisoners have told the truth. The Kremlin is putting on a show by returning prisoners of war, but in reality, it's just for show. No meetings, no phone calls. The SVO soldiers are being thrown back into battle again. Shocking details in our report. Watch until the end. Exclusive, secret deliveries and covert cooperation between Italy and Ukraine. Details that are being hidden from everyone. All this and more in our program, Hotspot. Extreme shock. Moscow is ablaze with retribution. Ukrainian drones are tormenting the Russian capital. The Kremlin is in a panic, and the epic video is already online. The miracle air defense is trying to save the bunker dweller, but the situation is spiraling out of control. Disaster has crept right up to the dictator. The situation is critical, Russia is at its limit, and this is just the beginning.
Pickups with machine guns mounted on the roof around the perimeter of the Kremlin. It's unlikely that Putin and his generals expected to see such a scene in the 4th year of the war. This past weekend, Moscow and the surrounding region came under a massive drone attack. At night, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. By morning, their operations had been restored. In the Kommunarka area, explosions were heard during the attack and smoke was seen rising above the forest. All night, Moscow Mayor Sobyanin was posting about downed drones on his Telegram channel. Other Russian public channels also reported on the large-scale drone attack. The Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to launch mass attacks on Moscow and the region. Within a couple of hours, 14 drones heading toward the capital were destroyed. Explosions in the sky were heard in Domodedovo, Podolsk, Dubna, Ramenskoye, Kommunarka, Troitsk, and Kolomna. At Zhukovsky and Domodedovo airports, 5 flights were cancelled and 6 were rescheduled. Restrictions have been imposed on departures and arrivals. In the Moscow region, a massive fire broke out at the Serpukhov oil depot as a result of drone strikes. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nearly 200 attack UAVs were shot down overnight.
This is not the first time that Russians themselves have recorded more than 40 drones heading toward Moscow. We are precisely trying to bypass the capital's air defense system, which is now deployed directly there. But we understand that all of this exists. Specific retaliatory strikes and probing actions. Probing to see how to deliver a more effective combined strike.
Recently, Western media published a map of the air defense systems guarding the Russian capital. But even through such dense protection, Ukrainian drones managed to slip through. Because of this heavy defense of Moscow, other regions and strategic sites across Russia are suffering. Analysts note that the systems are constantly being moved around. But the majority are concentrated around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Putin's residence in Valdai. There simply aren't enough systems to protect oil refineries and other strategic sites in the regions. This is exactly what the Ukrainian armed forces are taking advantage of. In the Moscow region, explosions were heard near the airfield where Russia's strategic aviation is based. The Shaykovka Strategic Aviation Air Base and Kaluga Airport in Russia's Kaluga region were also under attack. This is not the first massive drone attack on Moscow and other regions, even though the Russian Ministry of Defense always underreports the number of drones. Almost 200. That's a significant number, and it will only continue to grow.
This has a very serious anti-propaganda effect directly for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself, as Putin and his inner circle explained it. We can see how the war is coming directly to Moscow, and not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding. To be continued.
Before the start of the so-called special military operation, drones did not terrorize ordinary Russians, let alone Muscovites. Now, however, air raid sirens throughout the night are becoming a routine occurrence for Moscow. And perhaps now Russians will have questions and complaints for the master of the Kremlin.
Breaking news, Russia is in shock. A strike on the dam and a counteroffensive in the south. Putin is losing control. Belgorod is in danger. Ukrainian defenders are liberating territories in the Dnipropetrovsk region, but the Kremlin is eager to seize 4 more regions. Resistance is growing. New statements from Trump. The American leader is ready to quickly achieve peace in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Sensational news and details in our report. The world is on the brink of shocking events. The Russian capital is under drone attack for the second time this month. A mobile fire group was even stationed near the Kremlin, apparently to guard the main object of Russian military infrastructure.
According to reports from the Russian side, 34 Ukrainian drones were shot down over Moscow and the Moscow region. Moreover, it was reported that one of them struck and impacted the territory within the area of an oil refinery facility, causing a subsequent detonation.
And it wasn't just Moscow. Ukrainian drones visited at least 10 regions of Russia. Even propagandists are acknowledging the attack, writing that the carpet plan was activated at some airports. And in the regions there is damage to infrastructure. Drones attacked the dam of the Belgorod reservoir as a strategically important object in the war against Ukraine.
The strike on the dam in Belgorod region essentially neutralizes Russian logistics. This affects both the supply of material and technical support for Russian troops engaged in active combat on Russian territory itself, namely the Kursk region, the Klushkovsky and Tetkinsky districts, and first and foremost, the units of the occupation army in the temporarily occupied territories of the Kharkiv region.
Another victory in pushing back the occupiers. The defense forces have cleared the village of Yegorovka in the Dnipropetrovsk region of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, according to the Strategic Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Over the past week, Ukraine's defense forces have liberated a number of settlements. This effectively puts the Russian dictator's plans to create a broad so-called buffer zone on hold for now, already on the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and the use of this factor as an element of military political pressure both on the United States and on Ukraine at the moment when Russia is introducing the end of the war.
Meanwhile, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov, reported to the Kremlin leader about the successes of the occupation army in several directions, and about the encirclement of dozens of Ukrainian battalions.
The strategic goal of the Russian army and political leadership is to establish full control over the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. All the plans of the Russian command at the moment involve expanding the theater of military operations at the expense of the Sumy, Kherson, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia regions. This is the tactic of the so-called thousands of strongpoints, which aims to distract the operational planners of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine from the main direction of the Russian strike.
Where Putin and his army are not expected, all possible weapons are traditionally used against civilians. On Sunday, October 26th, Russian terrorist forces attacked a passenger minibus that was traveling on the highway towards Sumy. According to preliminary reports, 5 people were injured. Among them was a minor child. One person is in serious condition and has been hospitalized. Putin's worst nightmare is not only Ukrainians but also Russians. The Russian FSB has accused former oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the anti-war committee of attempting a coup. Khodorkovsky, who is in exile in London, denies the allegations.
In the Russian Federation, one can only become an oligarch with the permission of the current authorities and Russian special services. And accordingly, even a former oligarch does not have the opportunity to exist independently in the political sphere without the appropriate actions of either the political authorities or accordingly the Russian special services.
Donald Trump stated that he could very quickly reconcile Afghanistan and Pakistan. The US president also responded to Putin's threats regarding the Burevestnik missiles and advised him not to do that again.
The information about the Burevestnik tests is based solely on statements from the head of the General Staff of the occupying country's army, Gerasimov, and from statements by the Russian dictator. Moreover, it should be noted that the United States did not deploy the Boeing radiological monitoring aircraft on the day of the tests, nor on the days before or after. This aircraft is used to study the atmosphere for the presence of radioactive substances in the air.
Ukraine is arming itself. Despite the difficulties, the state order for Flamingo missiles will be fulfilled by the end of the year. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And Ukraine is also ready to open a factory for the production of Gripen aircraft. This week, our country and Sweden have already signed a preliminary agreement for the supply of about 100 new modification Gripens. And it seems this is only the beginning of the cooperation.
Panic in the Kremlin. Putin is afraid of a coup. Russia is on the brink of chaos. The economy is bursting at the seams. Banks are on the verge of collapse. The FSB is searching for enemies. Khodorkovsky under attack. The purges have already begun. Who will fall out of favor next? What or whom is the bunker dweller so afraid of? Details in our report. For almost a quarter of a century, Vladimir Putin has been building a system of personal power in Russia, a totalitarian state where any dissent is punished with fear, the cement of the regime. But today, this monolith is starting to crack. The Russian dictator is in a panic, afraid of losing his grip on Russia. As the Telegraph writes, the bunker dweller is meticulously guarding his regime against any threats. Recently, the FSB accused Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the Russian anti-war committee of preparing a coup d'etat. According to the security service, the organization is allegedly planning a violent seizure of power by overthrowing the constitutional order.
This tells us that the Kremlin is paranoid. Putin is looking for enemies in an attempt to strengthen his regime. John Herbst, Senior Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and former US Ambassador to Ukraine.
After spending 10 years in a Siberian prison, Khodorkovsky was released in 2013 and fled to Europe, where he founded the Anti-War Committee in 2022. In an interview with The Telegraph, he stated that the FSB's accusation reflects the Kremlin's fear of the future and the issue of the transfer of power.
What do we have in Russia? A prime minister whom no one elected, appointed by Putin. Courts appointed by Putin. A parliament whose seats were filled as a result of rigged elections and whose legitimacy no one believes in. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Russian entrepreneur and publicist.
They couldn't care less about the liberals who fled after being castrated. They're not afraid of them at all. They're not afraid of each other either. Of the same predators, those who walk around you, smile at you every day, and swear loyalty to you. These are the ones who can, and Putin knows this perfectly well. And the Prigozhin affair, even if it was just theater, clearly showed that no one will defend him. Neither the National Guard, nor the police, nor the rank and file, nor the generals, no one cares, no one gives a damn. And that's why Putin is afraid.
And indeed, fear is becoming the key word. The dictator is cornered, and the economic situation only heightens the anxiety. Russia's Minister of Economy, Maxim Reshetnikov, has admitted that the country is on the verge of a recession. The banking system is suffocating under the debts of defense enterprises. According to Harvard analyst Craig Kennedy, $190 billion in loans have been issued to defense industry companies without any guarantees. And now this bubble could burst at any moment. Moreover, Ukrainian drones have destroyed more than half of Russia's oil refineries, forcing drivers into huge lines at gas stations and causing a fuel shortage. And new sanctions from across the ocean have only intensified the blow. Donald Trump has imposed the most painful restrictions since the start of the war. The giants Rosneft and Lukoil have come under fire. Now China and India are cutting back on purchases of Russian oil. Almost 3 million barrels per day are at risk. And with them, half of the Kremlin's revenues. But Putin fears not only internal threats, but external ones as well. The dictator is pulling more and more air defense systems toward the Kremlin. There are already 5 layers of defense around the capital. S-300 and S-400 systems are being brought in from all regions.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Nuclear blackmail from the Kremlin. Putin threatens with the Burevestnik after US sanctions. The dictator brandishes a new wonder weapon and conducts drills. But experts question the effectiveness of this terrifying weapon. There are more questions than answers. What can the Burevestnik really do, and what is the world afraid of? Exclusive details in our report.
The Kremlin has once again boasted about its super weapon. Another one, no analogs for intimidation and propaganda.
They're running out of gasoline. Factories are burning, the country is in a complete financial mess and so on, yet they keep trying to test some kind of super weapon, another one of their so-called wonder weapons. This time,
they brought the Burevestnik nuclear missile into the spotlight, and it was Putin himself who did it. He claimed that they had supposedly conducted a test of this nuclear cruise missile, naturally a successful one.
After all, it's a unique product that no one else in the world has. Moreover, I remember very well the time when we officially announced to everyone that we were beginning the process of developing such a weapon. Even some of the most experienced and highly qualified specialists, people who had worked for many years in this field and were considered top-level experts, came to me and said that yes, this is a good and worthy goal to pursue, but in the foreseeable historical future, it's unachievable. And now, the decisive tests have been completed.
The Burevestnik tests themselves supposedly took place on October 21st, as reported by Gerasimov. The results were meant to inspire fear.
During the missile's flight, all assigned vertical and horizontal maneuvers were performed. Thus, its high capabilities to bypass missile defense and anti-submarine systems were demonstrated.
How many thousands of kilometers?
14,000.
14,000. And it stayed in the air for?
Well, let me see, about
15 hours, and that's
not the limit.
It's obvious that this is how the terrorist state is responding to the sanctions imposed by the United States, and it would sound threatening if not for one nuance. It's the Russians themselves who should be afraid. The Burevestnik is by no means a new missile. Its development began in Russia back in 2001. However, it was Putin who publicly announced it, only in 2018. At that time, he claimed that the Burevestnik's range was unlimited and its flight path could be unpredictable. It would be worth clarifying what the consequences of a launch might be. After all, it's not for nothing. In the US, Burevestnik was called the Flying Chernobyl.
The missile is dangerous because if its reactor is destroyed, if it is shot down, or if it crashes or has an accident, a large area will be contaminated. A fairly large area. And no sane person wants that. That's why the Americans abandoned this environmentally unfriendly project back then.
The Kremlin doesn't care about the consequences. So the development continued, and eventually a disaster did happen.
remember there was an explosion in Nyonoxa, some kind of nuclear, unclear, not exactly nuclear, but some strange explosion, after which radiation levels in Severodvinsk suddenly spiked. So they say that it was their Burevestnik missile that exploded.
This incident happened in 2019. That's when the tests ended in a radioactive disaster. Employees of Rosatom and the Ministry of Defense were killed. However, this is far from the first case and definitely not the last when nuclear missile tests went far from according to plan. Most recently, just in September of last year, there was another one-of-a-kind incident. A Sarmat missile exploded during launch in its silo. Satellite images at the time showed severe damage to the launch complex at the silo site. A huge crater. Going back to the Burevestnik, up until now there have been reports of 13 missile tests. Of those, only one is considered successful. At that time, the missile flew 35 kilometers and the longest Burevestnik flight lasted only 2 minutes. That was precisely when it covered those 35 kilometers. At the same time, the Kremlin, of course, never missed a chance to boast about successful tests without providing any evidence. Putin himself claimed a successful Burevestnik flight, and in October of 2023. All of this, of course, was accompanied solely by words.
And even if we assume, I'm not going to get into any special details or anything like that right now, that they actually managed to do it, even if we suppose they succeeded with 1, maybe 2 prototypes, it's something like the Oreshki that no one has really seen yet, right? So even if they managed to make just 1 such missile, what's the point of it?
Trump reacted instantly to the announcement about the Burevestnik drills and was not impressed by the nuclear club. On the contrary, he reminded everyone that there is a nuclear submarine off the Russian coast. And he called on Putin to focus on ending the war he started against Ukraine, rather than on missile tests.
I don't think what Putin is saying is appropriate. He should put an end to the war, a war that was supposed to last 1 week but is now in its 4th year. That's what he should be doing instead of testing missiles.
But the Kremlin has no plans to stop its nuclear games. On the contrary, they're even threatening that the missile will soon be adopted by the Russian army. Putin has ordered preparations for this missile. It is expected that this could happen in 2 years, that is in 2027. But is there actually anything to deploy?
The Kremlin's display of returning prisoners of war is just a show for the public. There are no meetings with relatives or phone calls. Simply put, there are none. Putin is forcing citizens to fight to the last man. How does captivity affect the contracts of Russian soldiers, and why is Russia not given a single day of respite? Watch our report for shocking details.
Russian flags, smiling faces, and neat clothing. This is how the Kremlin portrays the return of Russian prisoners of war to their homeland.
A pleasant and warm feeling that I will see my family, relatives, children, and loved ones.
But will they really see them? After all, the happiness didn't last long.
Did you go home after you returned?
No, I am afraid not.
Do your parents know that you were captured a second time?
Yes, they know.
How?
I wrote them a letter.
How did it happen that you didn't make it home but ended up back in captivity?
They sent me back to the war immediately.
But before sending prisoners of war back to their deaths, they can still be tormented for another 2 hours or so with interrogations and polygraph tests in FSB units.
It's surprising that they last so little time. Because let me remind you, today's Putin regime is the successor of Stalin's regime.
And what's also amusing is that the time spent in captivity doesn't count toward the length of the contract. Interesting tactic from the Kremlin, isn't it?
Putin just doesn't have enough cannon fodder. That's why everyone who can stand on their feet and take part in meat assaults will be sent into those meat assaults. And accordingly, it's only natural for Putin that everyone who is exchanged will be sent right back to the front. And they're not planning to let them go anywhere, because these are already the slaves he has claimed for himself, these very same slaves.
And of course, there is no rest, no meeting with relatives, or God forbid, any rehabilitation provided for in Russia. After all, you haven't fulfilled your duty to the end.
Just imagine for a moment that they return home after being held captive by Ukraine. And they start telling people what is happening at the front and what happened to them while they were prisoners in Ukraine. How they lived, basically, ate, walked around, did things, watched TV, read books. They did what they liked, and just imagine what people will say about Ukrainians after hearing their stories. How could they possibly be allowed to interact with people? They can't. They have to be killed immediately.
Also, everyone who goes to the so-called special military operation has a choice. Everyone is given instructions on how to act so as not to be captured.
At first I thought it was a joke, just some army thing. But actually it turns out it's not a joke at all. These are several ways I'm supposed to kill myself in case I'm at risk of being captured. And
also, in principle, Russia creates the most comfortable conditions possible for its soldiers and provides everything they need. But apparently water didn't make it onto that list.
we drink whatever we can, and we'll figure it out as we go.
Apparently Putin doesn't really care about actually getting his citizens back.
Putin doesn't even consider them people. To him, they're just cannon fodder. And whether they have water or not doesn't matter to him. Well, if there's no water, they'll just drink from puddles, really. But the main thing is go and die for the Führer. Putin really does believe there are plenty of people. Russia's mobilization reserve is indeed large. He believes that his police apparatus, the FSB, the police, and so on, will be enough to drag anyone to war, anyone they need whenever they need them. And that's why he doesn't feel sorry for anyone at all.
But there are also those who do manage to return home after the war. Apparently, they were lucky enough not to be captured or poisoned by the supposedly crystal clear water from the ground.
Contract soldiers can have a set term of service, and when their contract ends, they can return. But it's clear that if someone was already in prison before the war, they already had issues to begin with. Their mental state wasn't great to start with. And after fighting in the war, they completely lost it. So there's nothing surprising about that. Let's remember, Putin doesn't consider anyone to be human. That's why there's no need to care about them, and they receive no psychological help at all.
At first, they promised to come back, and not empty-handed either.
We'll come back with victory.
But in a situation where you're fighting to the death on the front lines for Putin's dreams, it would be good just to make it back at all. But even that, unfortunately, isn't provided for in Russia itself. Top secret, Italy is helping Ukraine but is keeping the details hidden. No one has seen it, no one knows, but the support is in full swing. Ukrainians are not alone. Secret deliveries, hidden agreements, covert cooperation. The Kremlin is in shock. All the details that are being kept from the world, only in our report. About
the assistance from this country, it is customary not to disclose it, but that absolutely does not mean it doesn't exist. Italy is another partner of Ukraine, helping our country in the fight against the Russian occupiers. The country has significant experience in producing air defense systems and ammunition for them. A lot of attention is now being given to the prospects of joint production of these weapons in cooperation with our country.
It's important to understand that any European country that says we are ready to launch production facilities for manufacturing weapons is important to Ukraine. Because one way or another, the weapons produced by the European Union will end up in Ukraine. Because many, and not only in Ukraine, in Europe, in the European Union, in Ukraine, so what about Europe? When modeling the situation, people say that after Ukraine, Russia will wage war against other countries on the European continent, so more attention needs to be paid to weapons production.
It should be noted that aid to Ukraine is being provided against the backdrop of internal political struggle within Italy itself. In 2025, 192 deputies supported aid to our country, while 41 voted against it. Nevertheless, at the moment, the Italian government is officially able to support Ukraine and supply weapons until December 31st, 2025.
Of this year. And different sides sometimes take, let's say, completely opposite positions. That is, when we talk about political life in Italy, we can recall that Salvini has been and remains an influential politician in Italy, and it is believed that, and there seems to be evidence that he has ties to Russia. However, since the beginning of the full-scale war, Salvini has demonstratively provided assistance to Ukraine. In other words, he didn't behave the way some clearly pro-Russian politicians in the European Union do.
According to experts, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni takes a rather tough stance.
Nevertheless, it is Meloni who is, at least publicly, the author of the proposal. About the idea that, let's say, if Russia is against Ukraine joining NATO, then let's not admit Ukraine to NATO, but instead simply extend NATO's Article 5 to cover it.
As of today, it is known that Italy is participating in the supply of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine, together with the British and French governments. In addition, there have also been deliveries of Puma armored personnel carriers, which the government has never reported in the media or mentioned in official documents.
Nevertheless, I do not rule out that it is present because, after all, when the European Union says that helping Ukraine is a trend, then accordingly Italy, as one of the leading countries of the European Union, cannot stand aside, otherwise it misses out on an important opportunity.
Moreover, Italy has gone further in supporting Ukrainians and is trying to minimize the purchase of Russian energy resources.
Back in 2022, there was a report that for the first time since 1976, Italy went a week without buying gas from Russia. This, of course, was a very serious step, and Italy took it.
Italy is not as steadfast in its informational support for Ukraine as it could be. However, its actions speak to the country's position, better than any words. Experts note that the Prime Minister of Italy also has good relations with US President Donald Trump, which allows her to facilitate communication between the United States and the European Union regarding aid to Ukraine.
That's all for now, and for more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.